All right, welcome back, part three, the life of Jesus. So, we are going to briefly go over a couple of his most well known parables. Parables, again, are stories that are meant to explain something. Usually, the parable part, the actual story that is being told, has different characters standing in for different people. So, it's basically like a big metaphor where certain items might stand in for something, or items or animals can stand in for people, and vice versa. And that'll make a little bit more sense after we talk about the first few parables. So we're going to cover 4 parables, 2 a little bit lengthier and 2 a little bit shorter. Just because, one, they're the most popular, and also because they teach some of the most important lessons. So the first one you will probably hear described as the parable of the prodigal son. Just means the parable of the returning son, or sometimes it'll be referred to as the forgiving father. So what this parable is of a man who had 2 sons, and he owned a farm. He had lots of land, lots of animals, lots of money. And his older son was a very hard worker. He did what he needed to do. He didn't ask for too much. And then his younger son, he didn't really like to work. He just wanted to have fun and goof off and party and do all sorts of other things that were fun for him without helping other people. So one day he came to his father and he said, I want my half of my inheritance money, or the money that he would be receiving once his father died. He goes, and I want it now. And surprisingly, the father agreed to give it to him. So the younger son took this massive amount of money and he went traveling, and he bought all sorts of expensive things, and he did all sorts of cool stuff, and he just wasted all of his money. And then all of a sudden, a little while later, when all of the money was gone because he had foolishly spent it all, a famine hit. A famine is when plants and crops don't grow very well, and there's a shortage of food, and there's not enough food to feed all of the people. And so this boy, young man, he was starving, he was cold, he was homeless, he's hungry, he has nowhere to work, he's not getting fed enough, he's not getting paid enough, food prices are really expensive. And he was sitting there and he was thinking to himself, my father was really fair to his workers. He paid them a good amount of money, and they always had enough food to eat, and he was always really nice for them to work for. And he said, my father will never take me back as his son because I did all of these foolish things, and I sinned against him, and I treated him really badly, and I spent all his money. And so he said, I'll go home and I'll ask my father if he would employ me and let me have a job as one of his workers. And at least then I'll have enough food to eat and I'll have somewhere to sleep. So he made the long journey back home to his father's house. And to his surprise, when his father saw him, he started running towards him. And it's very important to know that back then, Jewish men did not run. It wasn't considered to be dignified or respectful. So his father running was a big deal. It was it was a sign of him being extremely emotional. And he ran to him and he hugged him, and he called his servants and he said, we need to go and have a big feast and lots of food and wine and drink and be so excited because my son was lost and now I found him and he came back. And he was just overjoyed to see his son. And even though the money was all spent, and even though his son had made all these mistakes, he loved him so much that he was just thrilled to have him back alive. And the older brother was quite upset, and he said, that's not fair. I've never left you, and I've always worked really hard for you, and you've never had a feast to celebrate me. And his father said to him, yeah, you've never left me. You've always been here. You've always enjoyed everything that I have, which I've shared with you. But he left, and he ran out of money, and he was starving, and he was hungry, and he was cold, and now he's home. And that story is very important because in it, the father is kind of like God, and the younger son is kind of like us. We will make mistakes. We will sin. We will do things wrong. We will hurt other people's feelings. We will not treat others kindly. We will say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing because people are not perfect, although we should try to be. But God always loves us anyway. He will always love us and welcome us with open arms if we come to him and we say, I'm sorry, I want to come back to you, I want to be with you, I want to be close to you. And God will always open his arms up and give us a big hug and say, I'm so happy to have you back. I love you. I want you to be here. So that was an important lesson that Jesus taught about God and about how his forgiveness and his love is pretty much never ending. Another really important story that he told is called the Good Samaritan. So a little background, Jews, which Jesus actually was a Jew while he was alive, Jews and Samaritans are two groups of people that just did not get along for whatever reason. And there was a Jewish man who was walking one day, and he had his donkey, and he had all of his clothes and some money and things, and these two men jumped out from around a corner, and they robbed him. They stole all of his stuff, and then they beat him up really, really badly, and they left him there laying on the road, bleeding and hurt. And pretty shortly after that, a priest walked by, a Jewish priest, and he took one look at the man lying there, hurt, bleeding, injured, and he just kept walking. And then shortly after that, a Levite, or which is a Jewish man from the tribe of Levi, walked by, looked at the guy, kept walking. And then finally, for the third person that passed this man was a Samaritan. And this Samaritan, even though Jews and Samaritans did not get along, immediately knelt at the man's side, and he started to wash his wounds and clean him up. He got him safely to an inn. He got him a room where he would be looked after and taken care of. He paid for the man to see a doctor and to get well. He paid for the hotel, the inn for the man to stay in. And that was a big deal because Jesus was trying to teach everybody that you have to help other people, and you have to help people that are not necessarily your best friend or just like you. And that we should never judge somebody based on who they are. Because in this story, it was not the priest who is supposed to be good and holy that helped this man. It is not the brother, the Jewish brother from the same tribe that helped this man. It was a Samaritan, and someone who, for all intents and purposes, was kind of an enemy, somebody that he didn't get along with, and yet that was the person who had a kind enough heart to chose to help him. So we need to be willing to selflessly help others no matter what. The last two parables that we're going to talk about kind of are entwined with each other. Jesus uses a couple of different parables, examples, to describe the relationship between God and his people. And Jesus said, that God will be more excited to have a sinner come back to him and not sin anymore than have 99 other people that have never sinned or that have always stayed with him and walked in his ways. And he compared it to a shepherd that has 100 sheep. If a sheep goes, it gets lost, and the shepherd goes after it and finds it and brings it back, that's something to celebrate. If a woman has 10 coins and one of them falls on the floor and she can't find it, and then eventually after looking she finds it again, that's something to celebrate. So people who have fallen away, who have come back to God, have just as much value. They are so celebrated. It makes God thrilled when he is able to have someone come back to him that had been lost to him, much like the story of the prodigal son. We also find that we are called to apologize for our sins, to repent. We're called to be forgiving and kind and loving, good to our neighbors, to be fair, to be peaceful. And we will joyfully do all of these things because at the end, the reward for being a good person and trying to follow God's rules and trying to live the way he wants us to is the reward of heaven. And being given the gift of heaven is incredible. There's nothing that we could do to earn that gift except that God has given it to us because he loves us. But it is our responsibility to try to do everything we can to be worthy of that. We don't earn God's grace and God's love. He just loves us anyway. But we should want to be the best that we can be. And if we have to give up certain things that are harmful or that are bad or that are sinful, we should be willing to do those things, to give up them. Because what we get in return for being selfless and trying to follow God and giving those things up is something that we could never buy with money. It's something that we could never find if we searched for it here on earth. And the Bible verse that explains that is, it says that the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. And that just means, you have to be willing to give up some things that you enjoy so that you could get an even bigger joy at the end.